The city is a machine. Most people see the traffic, the buildings, the parks. They see the results. I see the code. I see the interlocking systems, the delicate balance of inputs and outputs that make it all function. For 20 years, I wrote that code. Not in a programming language, but in the dense, precise language of municipal law and urban planning. My name is Mara Hayes. Until recently, I was the director of city planning. My office was a quiet testament to a well-ordered world. On my screen, the city unfolded in a cascade of data overlays. I called the system Artemis. I had built it from the ground up. It was a digital nervous system for the metropolis, mapping every water main, every electrical conduit, every property line, every zoning variance. With a few keystrokes, I could see the city's past and model its future. Artemis was logical. It was elegant. It was incorruptible. It was my magnum opus. But the true soul of my work was a physical document, the Horizon Master Plan. 500 pages of meticulously researched, legally ratified text I had co-authored a decade ago. It was not a collection of suggestions. It was a promise. A promise that the city would grow with purpose, that parks would have sunlight, that neighborhoods would have character, that a city could be a home, not just a collection of assets to be leveraged. He had no idea what he was really trying to steal. He thought it was just about a building. My life outside of that office reflected the same principles, but with soil instead of silicon. My apartment was small, minimalist. It overlooked a park I had designed 20 years ago when I was young and full of a different kind of ambition. The view was my nightly reward. I didn't own a television. The noise felt like a violation of the quiet order I cultivated. My companions were a collection of bonsai trees, each one a living sculpture, a decades-long project in patience and controlled growth. You cannot rush a bonsai. You cannot bully it. You must understand its nature and guide it, a lesson lost on so many. In the corner stood a vintage 1920s drafting table. Its wood was worn smooth by the hands of planners long dead. At night, I would sketch. Speculative layouts, impossible green spaces, cities that breathed. It was not for work. It was for the art of it, the soul of the machine. I drank my tea from a single chipped ceramic mug, a relic from college, a reminder of the person I was before I had to build armor out of my expertise. This carefully balanced world was about to be invaded by a man who treated life like a game with cheat codes. His name was Julian Croft, 32 years old, but with the unearned confidence of a king and the petulance of a toddler. He was the mayor's son. That was his entire resume. He wore expensive suits that were always just a little too tight in the shoulders, as if he were trying to physically inflate himself to match his ego. His hair was slicked back with a severity that suggested a daily battle against a much more humble reality. He was introduced to me as a visionary developer, a corporate absurdity if I ever heard one. Visionaries create. Julian assembled. He assembled tax breaks, political favors, and other people's money. His fatal flaw was a simple one, common to his breed. He genuinely believed that rules, laws, and history were charmingly quaint suggestions designed for the little people. Our first planning meeting was a masterclass in his particular brand of incompetence. He didn't want to build a skyscraper. He wanted to, and I quote, disrupt the skyline with a new vertical synergy paradigm. He gestured with hands that were too soft, his expensive watch catching the light. The words meant nothing. They were just noise, scraped from the back of a business magazine. He pointed to a map, his finger landing on a historic district. He called it a legacy asset ripe for reimagining. He meant ready to be demolished. I asked him about the environmental impact study, a standard, legally required step. He smiled a brilliant, empty smile. We're leveraging a holistic, eco-forward methodology to proactively mitigate our carbon footprint. I remember making a note. The sentence was grammatically correct but semantically null, a perfect summary of the man himself. His cruelty was not the hot-blooded kind. It was the casual, dismissive cruelty of someone swatting a fly. He didn't see me as a person. He saw me as a stubborn piece of software that was returning an error message. I was an obstacle. The small humiliations began to accumulate, like a fine layer of dust, dulling everything. He would schedule key meetings and forget to include me in the email chain. My junior planners would have to brief me afterwards, their faces a mixture of apology and confusion. He referred to me in a public forum as part of the entrenched bureaucracy, a necessary but slow-moving part of the process. I was a speed bump on his personal highway. He would dismiss my reports, dozens of pages of data and analysis from Artemis, with a lazy wave of his hand. "Let's not get bogged down in the weeds, Mara," he'd say, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'm a big picture guy." What he didn't understand was that the big picture is composed of tiny, crucial details. The weeds, as he called them, were the foundations holding the whole thing up. The final personal humiliation happened in the main conference room. The room was cold, sterile. The air tasted of recycled oxygen and ambition. Julian was at the podium unveiling his masterpiece, the Croft Spire. The renderings on the screen were monstrous, a 70-story tower of black glass and steel that looked like a shard of obsidian stabbing the sky. It was designed to dominate, to intimidate. It would cast a permanent shadow across Washington Park, a public space I had fought for years to protect. It violated a dozen core tenets of the Horizon Master Plan. When he finished his presentation, there was a smattering of polite, obligatory applause. He beamed, a conqueror accepting the adulation of the conquered. Then it was my turn. I did not raise my voice. I did not get emotional. Emotion was a currency he understood and knew how to devalue. I used a currency he did not. Facts. I walked to the podium and plugged in my own device. The screen changed from his gaudy rendering to the clean, crisp text of the master plan. Per Section 14A, I began, my voice even and calm. The height limit in this district is 40 stories. Your proposal is for 70. I clicked to the next slide. Per Section 22C, a development of this scale requires a 2-to-1 green space to footprint ratio. You have provided 0.5 to 1. I went on, point by point, dissecting his vision with the cold, sharp scalpel of his own city's laws. I wasn't just telling him no. In a room full of powerful people, I was exposing him as an amateur, a fraud who hadn't bothered to do the most basic homework. His face was a remarkable study in slow-motion combustion. It went from a confident tan to a blotchy pink, then to a deep, furious crimson. His jaw muscles tightened. He wasn't embarrassed. He was enraged, the rage of a king whose divine right had been questioned by a commoner. He stammered, his carefully constructed vocabulary of buzzwords deserting him. This is about a vision for the future, not some dusty old rule book. I looked at him, the man-child in the $1,000 suit. The rule book, I said quietly, is the law. The audience's craving for my blood was almost immediate, or rather, his was. 2 days later, the mayor called a press conference. I was asked to stand beside him. I assumed, naively, that it was to publicly reaffirm the city's commitment to the master plan, a show of strength, a way to put his son back in his box. The room was blindingly bright. The camera flashes were like tiny, hot explosions. The air was thick with the scent of hairspray and desperation. The mayor, a man whose face had been weathered into a permanent expression of pained sincerity, read from a teleprompter. He spoke of progress. He spoke of economic growth. He spoke of the need for a bold new vision. And then he announced my immediate termination for a failure to embrace the forward-thinking vision necessary for economic growth. I did not gasp. I did not cry. I felt a sudden, chilling calm settle over me. It was the feeling of a circuit breaker flipping. All the messy, useless emotions, shock, betrayal, anger, were instantly shut down. Over the mayor's shoulder, I could see Julian. He was trying to look somber, supportive of his father's difficult decision, but he failed. For a split second, I saw it, a smirk, small, triumphant, cruel. The camera flashes caught my face in that moment. I imagine I looked blank, impassive, but inside, the fury was being forged. The heat and pressure were immense. It was being compressed from a chaotic, burning rage into something cold, hard, and perfectly clear, a diamond. And I knew, with absolute certainty, exactly what I was going to do with it. My departure from the office was not a walk of shame. It was a strategic withdrawal. I did not storm out. I did not make a scene. I went to my office and took out a single empty cardboard box. The silence was profound. The bustling noise of the planning department seemed to be holding its breath. My colleagues avoided my eyes, suddenly fascinated by their computer screens or the dust on their desks. Corporate cowardice is a uniquely potent form of insulation. I walked past the wall of awards and commendations. Planner of the Year, the Civic Vision Prize. Framed letters from grateful community groups. I left them all to gather dust. They were symbols of a system that had just proven itself a sham. They meant nothing. Into the box went the chipped ceramic mug, a piece of my past, then a framed, antique map of the city from the 1890s, its streets a ghostly echo of the present, a piece of my knowledge. Finally, I carefully lifted a small, thriving juniper bonsai from my windowsill. It was 25 years old, a piece of my philosophy, patience, controlled growth. I taped the box shut. It was light. My entire professional life reduced to 3 symbolic objects. As I walked towards the exit, I passed the desk of Sarah, a junior planner I had mentored. She was brilliant, passionate, and not yet cynical enough to be broken. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and sympathy. I paused for a moment and gave her a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a goodbye. It was a transfer of responsibility. I was no longer the guardian. Now it was her turn. I was not a victim slinking away. I was a general leaving a compromised position to prepare for a new kind of war. My next stop was not home. It was not a bar. It was the county courthouse. The building was a monument to a different era. Thick stone walls, worn marble floors, the faint, dusty smell of old paper and slow-moving justice. The world of Artemis, of instant data and sleek interfaces, felt a million miles away. This was the system's source code, the analog foundation on which the entire digital world was built. I was no longer Director Hayes. I was Citizen Hayes, a private individual with a grievance. I went to the clerk's office. A bored-looking woman with formidable glasses sat behind a thick pane of plexiglass. She looked at me with an expression of profound disinterest. It was perfect. I wanted no fanfare. I wanted no attention. I slid a 2-page document through the slot. It was a simple legal challenge. A formal objection to the permit application for the Croft Spire. The clerk glanced at it, her eyes scanning the boilerplate text. Then they stopped. She squinted, pushing her glasses up her nose. She was looking at the citation. Citing Section 28B, subsection 4 of the Horizon Master Plan, she mumbled, more to herself than to me. The integrity clause? That's correct, I said. She stared at me for a long moment. A flicker of something, surprise, respect, crossed her face before the boredom slid back into place. She took out a heavy, old-fashioned rubber stamp. I had built this system with one hidden feature. The Horizon Master Plan was my fortress, but I was pragmatic. I knew that any fortress could fall if the people in charge simply opened the gates. A decade ago, after watching a neighboring city gut its own future for a corrupt stadium deal, I had drafted a final failsafe provision. It was buried deep in the driest legal annex, a string of text so dense and boring that no politician or developer would ever bother to read it. The integrity clause. It was a weapon of last resort, a bureaucratic dead man's switch. It stated that any zoning variance granted for a major development that grossly violated the plan's core tenets could be legally challenged by any citizen. A successful challenge would trigger an immediate, automatic injunction, not just on the project in question, on all new development permits in that entire city district, a scorched earth policy, a self-destruct sequence designed to make the cost of corruption too high for anyone to pay. I never told anyone about it. A threat is only useful until you have to make it. A secret weapon, however, is useful forever. The clerk lined up the stamp. With a motion she had probably made 1,000,000 times, she brought it down hard on the paper. Thunk. The sound was definitive, solid. An old sound from an old world of rules and consequences. In the silent, dusty courthouse, it was the quietest declaration of war the city had ever known. A single, perfectly executed keystroke that was about to crash the entire system. It was a moment of deep, personal, and exquisitely cold satisfaction. The game was on. The system itself became my weapon. Julian Croft thought he was a player. What he didn't understand was that I had designed the game board, written the rules, and hidden a trump card up my sleeve for 10 years. The first domino fell 48 hours later. A judge, a dry, humorless man named Peterson, who was a stickler for ratified law, reviewed my challenge. He had no choice. The language of the integrity clause was unambiguous. The Croft Spire's violations of the master plan were blatant. He signed the order. An immediate injunction was issued, freezing all work on the Croft Spire. I imagine Julian was annoyed, a temporary setback, a gnat to be swatted. He would have his father call the judge, apply some pressure, get it sorted out. But the clause was not a scalpel. It was a sledgehammer. And the true beauty of it, the part I savored, was that the injunction's blast radius was enormous. The order didn't just stop Julian. It froze every new development permit in the entire downtown district, the city's most valuable real estate, its economic engine. In an instant, it all seized up. The news spread not like a wildfire, but like a contagion through the fiber optic cables connecting the city's law firms and investment banks. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. I watched it unfold from my apartment, not on television, but through the Artemis system. I still had back-end access. A small oversight on their part. On the live map of city permits, one by one, the green active icons in the downtown core turned a stark, angry red. Inactive, legal injunction. A $20 million renovation of a corporate headquarters, frozen. A new hospital wing, desperately needed, frozen. A boutique hotel, half finished, frozen. The city's largest construction cranes, which had moments before been gracefully swinging steel beams across the skyline, stopped. They hung there, motionless, like giant prehistoric skeletons. A monument to Julian Croft's arrogance. I watched his world collapse in real time. His incompetence was now on display for everyone to see. His selfish attempt to bully his way past one rule had triggered a master rule that had ensnared everyone. The powerful people he so desperately wanted to be a part of were now his victims. The montage of his panic was, I admit, deeply gratifying. I heard about it from contacts still inside the department. First, there was arrogant disbelief. He was on the phone, yelling at his lawyers. "What do you mean, it's legally sound? Just get it thrown out. Call my father." But his father's influence couldn't just make a ratified law disappear. Then came confusion. He was in meetings, his face pale, as analysts explained that the city was losing millions of dollars a day in frozen investment and labor costs. He couldn't grasp the scale of it. His brain, so accustomed to simple cause and effect, want something, get something, could not process this complex, cascading failure. Finally, there was fear, the real kind. The developers, the actual players in this city, started calling. And they weren't calling to offer support. They were calling to demand a solution. He was no longer Julian Croft, the visionary disruptor. He was Julian Croft, the reckless child who had single-handedly broken the most expensive toy in the city. The look on his face when he realized that the very people he sought to impress now saw him as a toxic liability must have been a picture. He had lost control. He had never really been in control in the first place, and the sudden, brutal realization was causing his entire world to short-circuit. He was trapped in a cage of his own making, and I was the only one with the key. The reckoning was not a dramatic confrontation between me and Julian in a glass-walled conference room. It was something far more satisfying. It was quieter, colder, and happened in a room I was not invited to. It was the system correcting itself. The city was in chaos. The downtown core, the beating heart of the economy, was in a state of induced paralysis. The fury of the city's real developers was reaching a critical mass. These were not slick-haired boys like Julian. These were grizzled old money titans. Men like Marcus Thorne, who had been pouring concrete and raising steel in this city since before Julian was born. They built things that lasted. They understood risk, they understood contracts, and they understood that time was money. Julian was costing them a fortune. Their fury was not directed at me. They were businessmen. They might not have liked the master plan, but they understood the sanctity of a ratified law. I had simply used the rules as written. In their world, that was a respectable, if inconvenient, move. No, their fury was focused squarely on the amateur who had tripped the wire, the entitled child who had started a fire in a crowded theater just to see what would happen. The climax arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. A coalition of the city's 5 most powerful developers, led by Thorne himself, descended upon the mayor's office. There was no shouting. There were no threats. Their power was such that they did not need to raise their voices. I have a source on the mayor's staff who described the scene to me later. The 5 men sat in the expensive chairs opposite the mayor's grand desk. They looked calm. They looked, my source said, like surgeons about to deliver a terminal diagnosis. Marcus Thorne spoke first. His voice was a low rumble. "Frank," he said, addressing the mayor by his first name, a calculated dismissal of his office. "Your son has cost the men in this room a collective $50 million in the last 72 hours. This is no longer a political problem. It is a financial crisis. And your son is the cause." They laid out the brutal, simple reality. The injunction would only be lifted when the legal challenge was withdrawn. The legal challenge would only be withdrawn if the offending project, the Croft Spire, was pulled. They did not care about Julian's vision. They did not care about his ego. They cared about their own empires, which were currently bleeding money because of his incompetence. The look on the mayor's face when he realized what was happening was, I am told, a sight to behold. He was trapped. He had to choose between his son's ridiculous vanity project and the combined wrath of the city's entire development sector. He had to choose between his blood and his political survival. It was no choice at all. The mayor, pale and sweating, was forced to publicly execute his own son. The next morning, a press release was issued. The Croft Spire project was being indefinitely postponed, pending a full review. It was a flimsy excuse, and everyone knew it. Julian had been publicly and professionally neutered, not by me, his enemy, but by his own father, at the behest of the very industry he had tried so desperately and foolishly to conquer. It was a humiliation so profound, so complete, that I could not have designed a better one myself. The ultimate triumph was swift. It was logical. It was the only possible move left on the board. With Julian's project dead, the developers needed to ensure this kind of crisis could never happen again. They needed stability. They needed predictability. They needed a system free from the whims of incompetent political appointees and their even more incompetent sons. They used their immense financial and political power to lobby the city council. Their solution was elegant, born of pure self-interest, and it was the culmination of my entire career. They proposed the creation of a new independent zoning oversight commission. an entity with ultimate binding authority over the master plan, completely insulated from the mayor's office, a body that could not be bullied, bribed, or fired, and their unanimous, non-negotiable recommendation for its first chairwoman was me. The final scene took place not in a courtroom or an office, but in the grand chambers of the city council. It was a coronation disguised as a bureaucratic procedure. One by one, the council members, under immense pressure from the developers who funded their campaigns, voted yes. I was reinstated, not as an employee who could be fired on a whim, but as the unassailable head of a commission that held more real power over the city's future than the mayor himself. My triumph was absolute. I hadn't just won my job back. I had used my enemy's aggression, his arrogance, and his stupidity to forge a throne for myself, a throne built upon the very rules I was fired for upholding. The poetic downfall of Julian Croft was complete. His name was toxic. No bank would finance him. No firm would partner with him. He was a pariah, a walking, talking cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties and in boardrooms. The joke was that he had managed to disrupt the one thing he was supposed to be good at, his own career. He was a symbol of entitled incompetence, and his failure was my monument. The coup de grace came a week later. It was a final, satisfying postscript. I was in my new office. It was larger than my old one, with a commanding view of the city. My city. I was reviewing a new set of plans for a public library when a shadow fell across my desk. It was Julian. He looked awful. His suit was wrinkled, his hair was a mess, and his eyes were bloodshot with a mixture of rage and disbelief. He had bypassed security to get to me, a final, pathetic display of his belief that rules did not apply to him. "You," he snarled, his voice a raw whisper, "you ruined me." I did not look up from the architectural drawings. I calmly circled a detail on the blueprints with a red pen. The design for the children's reading garden needed more natural light. "No, Julian," I said, my voice even and quiet. I kept my eyes on the plans. I would not grant him the satisfaction of my full attention. You simply couldn't imagine a world where the rules also applied to you. I finally looked up at him. His face was contorted in a mask of impotent fury. I felt nothing. No anger, no hatred, just a profound and weary pity. He was a bug in the system, a trivial error that had now been patched. "That's a failure of imagination," I continued, my voice soft but clear, "not a personal attack." I held his gaze for a moment longer, then looked back down at the blueprints on my desk. I picked up my pen. I had work to do. "Now, if you'll excuse me," I said, dismissing him, his entire pathetic existence, with a final quiet sentence. "I have a city to run.